The day began like any other, following the familiar pattern of tidying up after breakfast and preparing for what lay ahead. However, I had no idea that what was about to unfold that evening would completely change everything. My stepson, Jake, had returned home for the weekend from college. He had always been courteous and thoughtful, the kind of young man any parent would take pride in. But that evening something felt different, something I hadn't anticipated. Jake had recently become very invested in fitness, frequently talking about exercise and health. His dedication was admirable, and he often shared advice about staying fit or easing stress. That evening, after a long day filled with errands and chores, I was completely drained. My back ached, and my muscles were tight from all the bending and lifting I had done. Jake noticed my discomfort almost immediately. With his usual charm, he offered what seemed like a harmless gesture, a massage. At first I hesitated. The idea of such physical closeness with my stepson felt odd. But Jake persisted, assuring me it would help ease my soreness and explaining that he had picked up some techniques from a friend studying physical therapy. Reluctantly, I agreed, reasoning that it was just a simple massage, nothing more. We settled in the living room, where the dim light of the setting sun created a calming atmosphere, softening the moment and making it feel less formal. Jake began with a gentle touch, placing his hands on my shoulders. I couldn't deny how good it felt. His hands were strong but gentle, skillfully working out the knots in my muscles. I closed my eyes, letting the tension in my body gradually dissolve under his touch. At first, everything seemed entirely innocent, just as I had expected. But then, a subtle change occurred. It was so gradual that I almost didn't notice at first. But soon his hands began lingering longer in certain spots, applying more pressure. What had started as purely comforting and therapeutic began to feel different. A warmth began spreading through me, one that went beyond physical relief. My heart started racing, caught between confusion and an unfamiliar excitement building within me. I tried to distract myself, opening my eyes and focusing on anything else, but it was impossible to ignore. Jake's hands moved lower along my back, and I felt his breath against the nape of my neck. My pulse quickened as I became torn between wanting to stop this before it escalated and an undeniable part of me that didn't want it to end. His hands slid even further, and my breath hitched in my throat. I knew it was wrong. He was my stepson, and this was a boundary we should never even approach. Yet in that moment, reason and logic felt impossibly far away. All I could focus on was how his touch awakened a part of me I hadn't felt in years, a sense of being alive and wanted. I wanted to speak, to stop him, but my voice seemed trapped, locked behind an overwhelming flood of emotions. Just as I thought I might finally gather the strength to stop him, Jake leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear, and whispered, "I've been waiting for this." His voice was low and charged with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. In that moment, something shifted entirely. The distinction between right and wrong blurred further, and my body reacted before my mind could catch up. I leaned into his touch, craving the warmth, the connection, the closeness. Before I fully realized it, we were entwined together on the couch, the world around us fading away, leaving only the two of us locked in this precarious, forbidden moment. My mind screamed for me to stop, to think about the consequences, to consider how this would change everything. But my body refused to listen. I had never experienced anything like this before. Not with anyone, not even my husband. There was a fire between Jake and me that felt impossible to extinguish, no matter how deeply I knew it was wrong. As the night wore on, we crossed lines I never thought I would breach. Each touch, each kiss, felt like venturing deeper into an uncharted, forbidden realm from which there was no escape. It wasn't just a physical connection. It was something far more profound, something that shook me to my very core. Jake was no longer just my stepson. He had become something else, something I couldn't fully comprehend or control. When it was over, reality hit like a crushing wave. I pulled away, the weight of what had happened settling heavily on my shoulders. Jake looked at me, his eyes a mix of satisfaction and something more complex, something darker. We sat in silence, the seconds stretching into what felt like hours, neither of us knowing what to say or how to move forward. Guilt washed over me, overwhelming and inescapable. How had I let this happen? How could I betray my husband, Jake's father, in such an unthinkable way? Yet I couldn't deny how I had felt in those stolen moments, how alive I had been, how wanted. That truth clung to me, even as shame and regret weighed me down. It was a reckless and perilous game, one that had the potential to ruin everything if the truth ever came out. Yet, in those moments, all I could focus on was the craving to experience that feeling again. Days passed, and the situation between Jake and me grew increasingly complex. We did our best to behave as if nothing had changed, but the unspoken tension between us was impossible to ignore, a heavy, shared secret that loomed over every interaction. My husband noticed something was off, questioning me about the shift in my demeanor. I brushed it off, blaming work stress and the pressures of daily life. Inside, though, I was torn apart, caught in a battle between the guilt gnawing at me and the lingering desire I couldn't extinguish. Jake, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. He acted as though what had happened between us was just another part of his life. His casual demeanor was both maddening and intoxicating. He'd throw me a knowing glance, offer a fleeting touch when my husband wasn't around, and it drove me to the brink. Part of me wanted to stop, to end whatever this was before it spiraled further out of control. But another, darker part of me, a side I barely recognized, was unwilling to let go. Then, one evening, everything unraveled. My husband had left town for a business trip, leaving Jake and me alone in the house. The tension that had been simmering for days finally reached a boiling point. That night, we gave in once more, and before I knew it, we were on the couch again, entangled in each other. But this time, something was different. There was a sharpness to Jake's touch, an intensity I hadn't felt before. It was as though he was testing me, pushing the limits, seeing how far I was willing to go. And the frightening truth was, I went along with it. I had already crossed so many boundaries. What difference did one more make? Afterward, as we lay there, the enormity of what we had done weighed heavily in the silence. I knew this couldn't continue, that if it ever came to light, it would destroy everything. But the thought of ending it, of never feeling that forbidden rush again, was unbearable. I was trapped in a tangle of guilt and longing, unable to find a way out. Yet, fate has a way of catching up with you. It wasn't long before the truth surfaced. My husband found out. I don't know how. Whether it was the way Jake and I exchanged glances when we thought no one was looking or something else entirely. But when he confronted me, there was no escaping it. The truth was out, and there was no undoing the damage. The aftermath was worse than anything I could have imagined. My marriage fell apart, my relationship with Jake was destroyed, and I was left to face the wreckage on my own. Despite the pain and regret, a part of me still longed for what I had lost, that exhilarating, forbidden connection. Even now I struggle to comprehend how I allowed things to spiral so far out of control, how easily I let myself be consumed by something so destructive. But I can't deny the reality of it. The feelings were real, and they've become a part of me, a permanent reminder of the boundaries we should never cross and the consequences that follow when we do. In the days that followed, everything felt surreal. My husband moved out, leaving the house eerily empty. Every corner of the home seemed to echo with memories of the life I had ruined. The trust I had shattered weighed on me constantly, an oppressive burden I couldn't escape. Friends and family began to distance themselves, some out of disbelief, others silently judging me. A handful reached out, offering support, but their eyes were full of unspoken questions. How could you let this happen? I had asked myself the same thing countless times. How could I have been so reckless, so blind? No matter how much I searched for answers, they remained elusive. All I knew was that what had started as something innocent, a simple, kind gesture, had spiraled into something I could never have anticipated. If my story resonated with you, or if you found something meaningful in it, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. I'll be sharing more stories like this, tales of resilience, healing, and finding light in the darkest moments. Thank you for listening.